Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to YPOers and friends around the world. And welcome to this global conference call, YPO Psychedelic Medicines for Mental Health Group, speaking with Rick Doblin. We're going to give a couple of minutes for other people to dial into the call, but welcome, and in a few minutes we'll begin the call itself.
Okay, and I'll wait for you to tell me when to start.
Yeah, you're live.
Okay, so tell me when to start though. Oh, well, how do we do that? Let's see. You're right, it's not on. Okay, let's see here. Okay, end show. Right. Do you see it now, Dick?
Yes. Again, well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to YPOers and friends around the world, and welcome to this global conference call of the Psychedelic Medicine for Mental Health Group. The format for today's call will be an introduction, and then Rick Doblin, who I'll introduce in a moment, speaking, followed by question and answer. After Rick's message and presentation and the Q&A, what we want to do is also get the ideas and questions of callers, your ideas regarding what this group can be doing in the future. Speakers, what you would like discussed, as well as programs or initiatives any people may be involved with that they'd like to share or are looking for help with or something like that. The idea is really here, utilize this as an opportunity to build a community. In order to submit questions as well as comments, what you will want to do is use the chat feature on the as part of this GoToWebinar program, which appears on your screen. So before beginning, one other thing, I want to let people know that Tuesday, April 7th, Robin Carhart-Harris of Imperial College in London, a founder of and leader of their Psychedelic Research Center and the leading neurologist in the world working on mechanisms of action in the brain and neuroimaging, will be joining us. Again, that's Tuesday, April 7th. So today, I'm very, very honored that we're joined by my dear friend, Rick Doblin. Rick is the founder and executive director of MAPS, and he will be describing the work he's been doing there. This has been going on now for over 3 decades since Rick founded MAPS, and his tenacity and drive and brilliance have led this to the point where now MDMA is in phase 3 clinical trials as a breakthrough therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, with incredible potential for healing the suffering of billions of people. Rick is one of the most tenacious individuals I know in the world. And Rick, it's an honor to have you here, Rick Doblin.
Thank you, Dick. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you all. And so I'll have about a 15 or 20 minute PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll have time for questions. And then, as Dick said, more interaction. So what I'm going to do this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you happen to be, is just kind of an overview to where I see psychedelic assisted therapies going in the future, and also to what MAPS is doing more specifically with MDMA assisted psychotherapy for patients with moderate to severe post-traumatic stress disorder. That was sort of the combination of drug, meaning MDMA, and clinical condition, PTSD, that I thought strategically made the most sense to be the first one to go through the regulatory system. And so far we are in the midst of phase 3, and so we are leading the way. And now I'll give you a sense as to why. So the first thing to say is that we are questing into the unknown. Our Crumb was a comic, Zap Comics, during the 60s and 70s out of San Francisco. But the main thing is that we're doing stuff that's never been done before, which is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy through the regulatory system, trying to end up with approval for prescription use. And so as we quest into the unknown in regulatory spaces, people are also, with the aid of psychedelics, questing into the unknown in their own psyche. And why is this so important? Stan Grof, the world's leading LSD researcher and theoretician, my mentor, the developer of holotropic breathwork, a way to alter consciousness legally once psychedelics were criminalized. Stan developed a way to go forward, and myself and many others have been trained in this holotropic breathwork. But what Stan has said is that psychedelics are to the study of the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is to astronomy, in the same sense that it was very dangerous for people to report what they saw through the telescope, and some Galileo died under house arrest. One of his followers, Father Bruno, was burned at the stake. Similarly, there's been controversy over what people have been able to discover through the use of psychedelics. But now we hope that the same way that the telescope is accepted, the microscope is accepted, we're moving to mainstream psychedelics, and then also to the insights that come through their use. MAPS is the nonprofit that I started in 1986 as a nonprofit pharmaceutical company and public education organization, trying to develop psychedelics through the scientific approach through the FDA. So that was 34 years ago. 6 years ago, or a little bit more than 5 years ago, in December 2014, we started the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. And that was because we were starting to anticipate that we might actually succeed in having MDMA assisted psychotherapy approved by the FDA. And while we are grateful for all of the donors that we have, we're a rare nonprofit in that we have the opportunity to have a product at the end, which is MDMA. And so what we've decided is that we want to demonstrate not just a new way to approach psychotherapy, meaning psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, but also a new way to market pharmaceuticals. And that's through a modification of capitalism called the Public Benefit Corporation that maximizes public benefit over profit. And I think if you look at the American healthcare system, it's warped out of all recognition by the profit motive. We have per capita expenses leading the world, but our outcomes are down 40 or 50 in the countries of the world. So it's not a good situation that we have here. And so the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation will market MDMA, and it's our pharmaceutical development arm. And whatever profits we make from the sale of MDMA will be reinvested in the mission of MAPS. So MAPS is the sole 100% investor, shareholder in the Public Benefit Corp. So even though the MAPS Public Benefit Corp is a for-profit, and we will be making taxable payments on whatever income we make from the sale of MDMA, and that income will be used to supplement what we need from donors, that we will be, even though it's for-profit, as I said, will be, it's all 100% owned by MAPS. So that's our virtuous circle. Okay, is this? Change presenter? No.
Can you do it without this?
I suppose I could, but let's.
All I will say is that Rick Doblin has managed to get MDMA to phase 3 breakthrough therapy at the FDA. So we will absolutely, in a moment, figure out the technical issue here.
None of those are working. Well, let's try a little bit more, because the slides are really good if we can do it. I can continue without the slides for sure, but it would be good if we can get them working. Share my webcam.
Video.
Well, we'll take just a few more minutes trying to figure this out. Well, the Iowa caucuses didn't figure stuff out either, so I guess that's. What's now?
Sherry, just give us the direction where we'll just continue.
Let's look at this.
I can't see a screen. I can only see the kitchen.
You good?
Okay. All right. Well, I'll continue. I wonder if you do share a screen, Dick, on yours.
Presentation.
Yeah, but if it'll, I'm signed in as you, so maybe that would. Well, I can certainly deliver the content without the PowerPoint. Okay, well, I guess I'll just continue. Too bad though.
And what we will do, with apologies, we will.
Yeah.
What we will do is we will, everyone will get a copy of the presentation, with apologies for the
Yeah,
technical
we'll give
issues.
people a link to download
Yeah,
it.
perfect.
Okay. Okay, so as I described then, we have MAPS, the nonprofit, and then the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation. What makes that system work out is that in 1984, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill, the Drug Price Competition and Patent Term Restoration Act, that provided incentives for developing drugs that are off patent. So, for example, MDMA was invented by Merck in 1912, and they had no idea what they had, and the patents have long since expired. And also in the late 80s, early 90s, I hired a patent attorney to develop an anti-patent strategy so nobody could patent any of the uses of MDMA, at least any of the ones that we were aware of. So we've done that. And so right now, the data exclusivity provisions are such that no one can use our data for 5 years. In Europe, it's 10 years to argue to market a generic. And in the US, if you do pediatric studies, which we're being required to do by the FDA, if we succeed in adults, we have to do what are called phase 4 studies in pediatric populations. We get an extra 6 months extension of the data exclusivity, and then it takes the FDA at least 6 months to review a generic application. So we will have more or less 6 years of protection. Somebody else can generate their own data for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, but it'll take them 5 or 6 years, and it'll cost them 60, 70, 80, $100 million. So chances are that's not going to happen. So we are anticipating, if we succeed and get approval for prescription use, that we will be able to be the only ones that have the right to sell it for a period of 6 years in the US, 10 years in Europe. The FDA, to give you a sense of how things are changing, in May 30th, 2019, the FDA, several officials presented at the American Society for Clinical Psychopharmacology, and they presented about psychedelic drug development, the perspectives from the FDA. And what they announced is that they're going to be creating a guidance document. There are thousands and thousands of guidance documents that the FDA puts out. There's laws, there's regulations, and then there's guidances, and those are non-binding, but those are the best practices that the FDA feels people should know, the sponsors should know, and ideally follow. And so the FDA is now going to be developing a guidance document for psychedelic psychotherapy, which is a tremendous development, and it indicates a willingness on their part to move forward with this whole field of research. Another aspect of this that's really remarkable, that's a sign of progress, is that we now actually have a psychotherapist who is a full-time police officer. So he's a police psychotherapist, and he's going through our training program in order to learn how to give MDMA-assisted psychotherapy to other police officers with trauma. So we're really building bridges in remarkable ways. There's also been an extremely positive coverage on Fox News about not just MDMA research, but psychedelic research, medical marijuana research in general. So that was a wonderful development. And I think it was in part because Rebecca Mercer, one of the part owners of Breitbart and one of the big supporters of Trump and Bannon, has actually donated $1 million to MAPS for our phase 3, with the only restriction being that it be limited to veterans. In order to really do phase 3, we're in the midst of a $55 to $60 million experiment. We've raised well over $35 million so far, and we're working to raise the rest of it. We feel confident, hopeful that we will. And to bring MDMA phase 3 to Europe will be about another $20 million or so, and we've raised $2 million of that. So that's just to give you a sense of the scale of the experiment that we're doing. And if we were a for-profit pharma or any other company, the expenses would easily be substantially more. We have a lot of people donating their time, a lot of people working for lower than market rates in order to help us do this nonprofit development. We've gotten support from across the political spectrum, as I mentioned, from the Mercer family. Rebecca Mercer donated $1 million. Elizabeth Koch, whose father is Charles Koch, has pledged 2.7 million, 900,000 a year for 3 years for our MDMA production, the medical grade MDMA. Richard Rockefeller and family have donated over $2 million. Over the years, Richard was a main thought partner of mine before he died about 6 years ago in a plane crash, which was tragic. But Richard was tremendously helpful in terms of opening the doors at the Veterans Administration and the Department of Defense. Richard worked on this in collaboration with his cousin, Senator Jay Rockefeller from West Virginia, who was on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. And then we've also received funding from the Open Society Foundations, from George Soros, for a training for therapists of color. What gives you a sense of the situation here in the US is that September 2018, which is now a year and about 5 months ago, there was 1,039,000 veterans receiving disability payments for PTSD. It's the third most prevalent service-connected disability after tinnitus, ringing in the ears, and hearing loss. And the estimate, even though the VA has not put out an exact number, but it's somewhere in the range of $17 billion a year in disability payments for well over 1 million veterans receiving disability payments for PTSD. Not all of them are 100% disabled, but various ranges of that. And that highlights the frustration that we feel when we've not gotten a penny yet from the VA for supporting this research. And we've been trying since 1990 to try to start research inside of VA, and it looks like we're getting close to doing that finally with Dr. Rachel Yehuda at the Bronx VA. To give you a sense of our results from phase 2, so we've been at this for 34 years. We began work with PTSD patients in 1999. We had the end of phase 2 meeting with FDA November 29th, 2016. And what we presented were the results from 107 people in phase 3 studies in the US, Israel, Canada, and Switzerland. And those people that were in the control group, meaning that they got therapy with either no MDMA at all or very low dose, just for blinding purposes, but not really full dose MDMA, that those people in the placebo group who were on average severe and were treatment resistant, at the end of the treatment, which is 3.5 months long, 3 day-long sessions of therapy, 8 hours long, and 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions, 3 before the first experimental session for preparation, 3 after each experimental session for integration. That and then 2 months after the last experimental session, 23% no longer had PTSD. So that's actually pretty good for this population, and that demonstrates that the therapy that we're providing can be helpful to people without active dose MDMA. However, when you add MDMA, the results more than double to 56% no longer receiving a diagnosis for PTSD. And of those that still had a diagnosis of PTSD, most of them had had clinically significant reductions in PTSD symptoms. And if we could have given them a 4th session, potentially many more of them would have no longer had PTSD. But the most important point is that, are these results actually transient or like a psychedelic afterglow? Do they fade over time? And so what we showed is at the 12-month follow-up, 1 year after the last experimental session, people keep getting better, and 2/3 no longer have a diagnosis of PTSD. So what we're showing is that people are able to learn how to process trauma. And once that they've learned that, they're able to work on their own after the treatment is over, after they're no longer meeting with the therapists. And instead of suppressing and being overwhelmed, they're able to process the trauma. So this, I think, is the most important finding, is 1 year after the last experimental session, 2/3 no longer have PTSD. On the basis of this data, we got permission to go to phase 3, and then we initiated a 8-month process what's called negotiating with FDA. It's called the Special Protocol Assessment process. And that was where you discuss and try to come to agreement with every aspect of the phase 3 design, which we managed to do. And so we have an agreement letter, and that means FDA is legally bound to approve MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD should we get statistically significant evidence of efficacy and should there be no new safety problems arise, which we don't think is likely since MDMA has been used since the middle 70s. Tens and tens of millions of people have used it, and we have a very good sense of the safety profile. We also were able to apply to the FDA and were granted breakthrough therapy designation. So that's the most important designation that the FDA offers for the most promising drugs. And there's shorter timelines, more meetings. 2/3 of the applications from pharma for breakthrough therapy are rejected. So FDA really does reserve this for the most important drugs. So we now have breakthrough therapy designation for MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And also 2 different groups have breakthrough therapy designation for psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. That's a company called Compass, which is for-profit, and then for major depressive disorder, which is a nonprofit company, Usona, which also has breakthrough therapy. We have phase 3 site locations, 15 of them, 2 in Israel, 2 in Canada, and 11 throughout the United States. We've also, in the summer of 2018, met with the European Medicines Agency in London and obtained approval to move to phase 3 in Europe. And so we're working now in 7 different countries in Europe in the very early preliminary stages of trying to get regulatory approval and then training the therapists. But it's going to cost roughly 1/3 what it costs in the US to make MDMA into a medicine in Europe. And that's because the Europeans will accept the US data. We're trying to globalize as well. I've been to China. We have one of our donors is helping us try to bring MDMA assisted psychotherapy to China. We're working with people in Australia, in Brazil, in South America. So we're basically getting interest all over the world. And so we're hoping to globalize MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. We have to do 2 100-person phase 3 studies. And we have now enrolled 88 of 100 participants in the first of the 2 phase 3 studies. So we're getting close to having enrolled everybody in the first of the 2 phase 3 studies. And once that happens, once we've enrolled everybody and have 60% or 60 people have reached the primary outcome measure, we're able to conduct what's called an interim analysis. And we have a data monitoring committee that's unblinded that takes a look at the data and then will let me know a number, and that number will be 0 if we don't need to add anybody for statistical significance, or it'll be 5 or 10 or whatever. And then we will increase the sample size in the first phase 3 study. And at that point, we'll be able to have a good sense as to whether we're likely to succeed, how long it's going to take, how many subjects it's going to require. We'll be able to rebudget. And this is anticipated to take place in April of 2020. So very soon we should have the data from the interim analysis. Now, future regulation post-approval. We're still discussing certain issues with FDA. For phase 3, we've come to agreement. We have a 2-person therapy team, and the lead person needs to be licensed to perform therapy, and the co-facilitator does not need to have a license. They could be pursuing licensure or be unlicensed, working under supervision of the first person. We do not require a doctor on site. But FDA, since they made these agreements with us, have negotiated with both Compass and Usona for psilocybin, and they made their restrictions more difficult. They require the lead facilitator to be an MD or Ph.D., and they want the co-facilitator to be licensed to perform therapy. And so we are now negotiating with FDA about future studies, what they're going to require from us. But fortunately, they can't change things for phase 3 because of the special protocol assessment process. So there are some issues that we're still discussing with FDA, and they'll mostly have to do with post-approval regulation. And then there's the REMS, which is called the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. And so these are also going to be negotiated with FDA. And what we've already proposed and what we believe FDA will accept is that the only people that can prescribe MDMA and treat patients are people that have been through our training program, because it's not MDMA as the drug. S-ketamine has been approved as a medicine for depression, and S-ketamine is considered to be the treatment in and of itself, not accompanied with psychotherapy. But that's not what we're saying. First off, I don't think that's ideal for S-ketamine, but secondly, I think that's definitely not the way that psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy or MDMA-assisted psychotherapy is being studied. So the only people that can prescribe it and treat patients are people that have been through our training program, and then it's only administered under direct supervision. It'll never be given to the patient to take home to do by themselves. There'll be centralized pharmacies that distribute to the approved prescribers, and that's going to be the essence of the risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. So it's going to be different than most drugs that are approved by FDA that can be prescribed by any doctor for what it's approved for, and also off-label. So this is going to be more tightly controlled, which we think is appropriate. We are being required, as I mentioned before, post-approval phase 4 to work with adolescents 12 to 17 with PTSD. And if that works, then we need to study children 7 to 11 with PTSD. And the theory here is that the sooner that you can treat people after their trauma, the easier it'll be to treat them and the better of a life that they'll have. One of the areas that we're going to be exploring soon is going to be group psychotherapy for both economic reasons and also for potentially seeing how that might enhance the treatment in certain ways with group integration and group preparation. We're working with Rachel Yehuda at the Bronx VA, moving towards a group psychotherapy study there. We've done other studies with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for social anxiety in adults on the autism spectrum with very promising results. Done MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for treatment of anxiety associated with life-threatening illnesses. We're moving to start a study now with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for treatment of eating disorders. A doctor with whom we're affiliated, but he obtained independent funding, Ben Sessa, has just completed a study of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for alcoholism. And we anticipate that 2022 will be the time that we obtain approval from FDA for prescription use of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. Europe will be a year or two behind that. And then we will start setting up psychedelic clinics. And there's right now in America, 14,500 drug treatment facilities, 6,000 hospice centers, 33,000 yoga and Pilates studios. So we anticipate thousands and thousands of clinics, and that's how this will be delivered. So that's the overview, and I look forward to questions now. If there's any questions.
Great. Well, Rick, thank you so much. So let's, as a first question, we've got a lot of questions that have come in, which is not surprising. You've raised a lot of really important issues. I want to just point out though one thing initially, and I want to make sure that I understood correctly, and if so, that it was clear to everyone. You were explaining that just the cost of veterans' disability related to PTSD, just veterans, is like $17 billion with a B dollars a year, and that you're looking for another roughly 20-ish million with an M dollars to complete the work that that looks like it will have a huge impact on PTSD for veterans and obviously for others who are suffering from trauma. Are we understanding that correctly, that the return or ROI is a potential 1,000 to 1 payoff, even just looking at the veterans group?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the sad story is that even though the veterans get most of the media attention, they're only a small fraction of the number of people in America with PTSD. It's mostly women survivors of childhood sexual abuse or physical assault or domestic violence or adult rape and assault. There's a lot of people with PTSD from accidents, more and more from natural disasters, There's people that have PTSD from medical operations. So while we think about the roughly 17 billion a year disability payments that the VA pays to veterans, the cost to society is vastly more than that. In addition, the VA spends 3 or 4 billion a year just on treatment of PTSD. So yeah, this is enormously highly leveraged, and it's just a tragedy, really, that this is falling to the nonprofit sector to get this done.
Well, it's also an opportunity for the nonprofit sector and donors and philanthropists to have huge leveraged impact by helping you in this work.
Yes, so, and also then since we're doing it in a nonprofit way, as I said before, we're not about maximizing profits, we're maximizing public health. And I think that will demonstrate as we go forward how that's trying to set up a new model for healthcare as well.
Fantastic. So let me go to questions. Someone has asked, I'm curious about what the bottlenecks of delivering treatment will be as these substances make it through the FDA process. Can you talk to bottlenecks and
yeah. So there's two main bottlenecks. One is going to be how well and how quickly we can train psychotherapists, because again, this is psychedelic assisted psychotherapy with the emphasis on psychotherapy. And it's not just as simple as giving the drug. And so we do have a therapy training team. We're expanding that. But I think that's going to be one of the bottlenecks, but I think we'll be able to address that. The other is going to be affordability and accessibility. This is sort of front loaded in terms of costs, in the sense that it's a lot of psychotherapy at the very beginning, but over time, it's going to be a lot cheaper than giving somebody medication for many, many decades or years even. And so I think the question for us is really going to be, how do we persuade insurance companies that this is worth covering? So we're working to do pharmacoeconomic analyses, and it's already well known that PTSD patients have higher healthcare utilization, and I think the evidence will demonstrate that really it's very cost effective, even though some of the costs are front loaded. So I think those are the two main bottlenecks. I think there's a lot of social acceptability that in the past has been an issue, but I think with the medicalization of marijuana that people have observed, so there's been a general social shift into what we've been seeing here, as far as previously demonized drugs that people are now recognized, have very important medical potentials. And it's not about the drug being good or bad, it's about how it's used. And so I think the bottleneck of social disapproval has been overcome, basically.
Great. A couple of questions sort of related here, asking kind of the pros or cons, or looking at the risks associated. And one is asking a question about how MDMA became a controlled substance, and is that cause for, what does that mean?
Well, let me say that the risks are very minimal and manageable in a medical setting where you're only giving the drug a few times. The main risks have to do with increases in blood pressure, mild increases in temperature. Those are easily handled. You may have heard about people that take ecstasy at raves and overheat and die, or from hyperthermia, or drink too much water, die from hyponatremia, from diluting their blood. Those don't happen in therapeutic settings. So really the risks are more psychological, I would say, that because people have had traumatic experiences, they've suppressed them, but not successfully. So they come in their nightmares, they come in triggers that they see constantly during the day. So it's something that's never really fully processed, never really fully passed. And these are extremely painful. There's people with PTSD that commit suicide. There's roughly 20 veterans a day committing suicide, many of them related to PTSD in some way or another. So I'd say that it's really how well we manage the psychological risks that is the most concern. And how did this become criminalized in the first place? Most people are not aware that MDMA was a secret therapy drug before it became the party drug ecstasy. So it was rediscovered in the middle 70s by Dr. Sasha Shulgin, a Ph.D. pharmacologist, and Leo Zeff, who was a clinical psych Ph.D., Leo was the leader of the underground psychedelic psychotherapy movement. And from the middle 70s to the early 80s, he trained hundreds of therapists and psychiatrists in how to work with this drug. About 500,000 doses were used in quiet settings with no problems. No police didn't know anything about it. It was legal, but it was just kept quiet for fear that it would be made illegal. But some of the people that tried it in those settings realized that this was a drug that a lot of people would want, that they could make money on it. They turned it into ecstasy. And that's where it started being used in public settings, particularly in Dallas, at the Summer Club, the place where ecstasy really became ecstasy. And that's what attracted the attention of the police. So when the police moved in 1984 to decriminalize MDMA, they had no idea that it was also this secret therapy drug. And so I led a nonprofit for MAPS, Earth Metabolic Design Lab, and we ended up organizing a therapist, and we sued the DEA to try to keep MDMA available as a medicine. And we went into what's called DEA administrative law judge hearings. The judge ended up agreeing with us and recommending Schedule 3, meaning that it would be criminalized for non-medical use, but legal for medical use. The administrator of the DEA rejected that recommendation. We sued a couple times to appeals courts and won. Eventually, the DEA lawyers figured out how to satisfy the appeals courts, and MDMA was criminalized. So that's where in '86 I started MAPS to make it through the system. So it was criminalized, nothing to do at all with its therapeutic potential, but just because it was being used in public settings as a recreational drug. And now we're trying to bring it back as a medicine. And it's already 34 years, 35 years since it was criminalized, and an untold number of people have suffered unnecessarily because this treatment was not available.
Great, thank you. Another question, can you describe the therapist setup and how a session actually works? What that looks and feels like?
Yeah. Yeah. So we have decided to use a male-female co-therapy team. People often have layers of trauma in their lives. And so even like, for example, veterans, who are talking about war-related trauma, often that's related to physical abuse or other traumas that they experienced at an earlier stage in their life. So we feel that a male-female team offers the most support, provides a semblance of good parenting that many people might not have received prior, and it's an 8-hour session. So we always want somebody in the room, one therapist in the room with the patient. Sometimes therapists have to get something to eat or go to the bathroom or so. And it's an 8-hour-long session with music and so roughly half the time, patient is listening to music, the eyes are closed to music, they're having a flow of imaginations, of imagery, of metaphorical thoughts. It's really incredible what's going on. And then roughly around half the time, people will take the eyes off and start talking to the therapist about what's going on. And there's no particular order for that. We don't say, the first hour just be quiet, the second hour talk to us. It's really based on this idea that there's inner healing wisdom to the unconscious. That the MDMA is membrane between conscious and unconscious mind, and people have a flow of experiences, sometimes bodies, their conscious selves, and thoughts and feelings. And we want to encourage people to go forward and experience and express whatever they're feeling. So it's based on we're supporting people to heal themselves, and there's no particular order, but at some point in the 8 hours, people will address their trauma. We've never had to remind people to do that. They always come around to that, and that's where the healing really begins, with them sort of reprocessing the trauma, feeling the fears and the emotions that they couldn't feel when they were initially being traumatized because they had to focus on survival, and the feelings then were so powerful and they were suppressed. So what we've really got is a method that we have standardized we call it inner-directed healing. The treatment manual is on the MAPS website, maps.org, in the MDMA section. You can read the treatment manual to see how we describe the therapy, but it's supportive. We follow the therapy. We're like midwives. We're not the ones that are doing the healing or giving birth. It's the people who are doing that themselves. And it's a long session because really there's just so much content, and the 8-hour session is a different model than people are used to for psychotherapy, but it works really well for MDMA. Psilocybin acts as a little bit faster, so that's more like a 6-hour session or so, and psilocybin is less verbal than MDMA. It's more ego dissolution, and so that's more 80 or 90% of the time people are listening to music, and maybe 10 or 20% of the time talking to the therapists.
Can you talk to some of the other potential indications that MDMA or psilocybin or other psychedelics might be helpful for? There's specific questions here regarding autism, specifically, even more than that, pediatric possibilities. So just some of the other work that's being done.
Well, as I mentioned, we did a study with autistic adults with social anxiety. So that was really about social anxiety, and the results were so promising that we want to go forward with social anxiety from any cause. I think MDMA will be tremendous. It's a very pro-social drug. There was an incredible experiment done in octopuses by neuroscientists at Hopkins, where octopuses are asocial unless it's mating season, but if you give them MDMA, then all of a sudden they want to hang out with other octopuses. So that really suggests that the pro-social aspects of this go so deep in our evolutionary history that they'll also work at a pre-verbal level. So that brings us to adolescents or young people as well that are traumatized. And we think that MDMA will work even if they're not able to really carefully articulate what's going on with them, but they'll be able to experience these pro-social effects. The eating disorder study I think will be really good, particularly addictions. A lot of what drives people to use addictive drugs is to escape from painful memories and emotions from trauma. So if you can address the underlying trauma, you'll be able to address issues with addiction and drug dependence. And so that's what we've seen from the study that was in England with MDMA with alcoholics, and we've seen a reduction in drug use in people in the PTSD studies. I think one of the best uses of MDMA will be in hospice centers and helping people that are facing death to work with those emotions. And MDMA is incredible in terms of reduction of pain. And so for people that are in pain near the end of their life, fearful of dying, MDMA will have a great role to play. One of the things that I think is one of the best uses, but it's not something we can medicalize, is for couples therapy. MDMA is tremendous for helping people be better listeners, to be less defensive, to be more self-accepting. But that's something that will either be off-label or will be, once we have more drug policy reform and people can access these things outside of medicine. But I think one of the best uses is going to be couples therapy for depression. Psilocybin is, as I said, the breakthrough therapy for major depressive disorder and treatment-resistant depression. MDMA could be helpful in depression as well. Many of the PTSD patients also score high on depression, and both PTSD symptoms and depression go down. Basically, this is psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So just think of what is psychotherapy for, and psilocybin, MDMA can be useful for that wide range of conditions. It's really remarkable, I think, the potential of these drugs when coupled with a psychotherapeutic context.
So there's also very interesting work that MAPS is involved with in terms of potential conflict resolution activities. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, Dick, I'm so glad you asked that. So as it turns out, couples therapy writ large into cultural conflicts, social conflicts. So it turns out that there's a group of Israelis and Palestinians that are doing ayahuasca, which is a psychedelic tea from the Amazon. They're doing ayahuasca together. They're sometimes doing MDMA together. Of course, this is all underground, but we've heard about it. And so it's a 3-year project that we're doing. The first year was interviews with these people, why they're doing it, what they're getting out of it. And then years 2 and 3 are going to be more of a controlled experiment, probably taking a group of Israelis and Palestinians to Spain for an ayahuasca session. And then we're going to be working with the Spanish Ministry of Health to see about getting approval for administering MDMA as well. So what these drugs do is twofold. The classic psychedelics like psilocybin or ayahuasca with the ego dissolution give people a sense that their identification as their race, their religion, their gender, their nationality, their socioeconomic status, that there's something deeper underneath that, which is kind of our shared humanity, and even deeper than that, this shared experience of life on Earth. And that people shift their core identification to something more profound and deeper. People would call that a mystical sense of unity and connection. But once you've had that experience, then you can come out of that and look at people who are different from you in terms of any of these ways that we divide ourselves, and realize that we actually have more in common with them than separate, and we can learn to appreciate differences and celebrate them rather than be frightened of them. And so it's on that basis that the classic psychedelics can be helpful in conflict resolution. And then through MDMA, that's helpful for people working through their traumas, working through their program scripts, working through the fears and anxieties they have about people that they've been in conflict with. And so I think that over time, we will find that there is going to be some very profound potentials of MDMA for conflict resolution. And one day we hope we will take the easy case of working with the Israelis and Palestinians, and then bring it to America for the hard case of Republicans and Democrats. And I think we'll find that will be very helpful for overcoming a lot of the partisanship that we have, and realizing that we're all Americans trying to live together and build a great and humane society.
Great, that would be wonderful. A question here, if you can just explain what microdosing is. There's a lot of talk in the press about microdosing, and again, because of the nature of this call, we're only referring to research and potential eventual legal uses of these substances.
Yeah, well, microdosing basically means taking amounts of the drug that are below direct perception. So if you take microdoses of psilocybin or LSD, you're not going to have visual disturbances, you're not going to have cognitive interruptions for your train of thought, but there will be very mild but potentially profound increase in attention, increase in creativity, increase in openness. We hear a lot about people in Silicon Valley and elsewhere microdosing to be more creative and more focused. There have been some studies that have looked at LSD microdosing for creativity. They've not turned out so well. And what they think happened there is just that there's the people that volunteered for it were already fairly creative. It was hard on the measures that they were using to show incremental differences. But there are a lot of people that talk about how microdoses are very helpful. And so a lot more research is going to be necessary for that. I think that there is some people that are microdosing LSD or psilocybin for depression. In general, I'm not that sympathetic with that, because what I think we are trying to get away from is, here's a drug, take it every day, take it for months or years, and it will control your symptoms. But if you stop taking it, your problems come back. That's the for-profit pharmaceutical model. What we're trying to do is say, with intensive supportive psychotherapy with very profound effects with macrodosing, for depression, for anxiety, for fear of death, for PTSD, all these things, that we can, in a deep way, with only a few sessions, address psychological conditions, and then make it so people don't need the drugs anymore. And so that's our goal. So microdosing can be used for clinical conditions, but in general, I don't think that's the goal. That certainly we're not having that as a goal. But I think that microdosing will eventually be something that can be used for creativity, for focus, for more openness. And so I think that there's a lot of areas of exploration of how these drugs can be used that we've basically had about half a century of suppression and a lot of lost opportunities. And now we're in the midst of a major psychedelic renaissance, and we are about to really both discover and embed in society a whole host of remarkable uses for psychedelics, both microdosing and also fuller macrodosing.
And I would just point out to everybody listening that Rick Doblin has been for decades the leader in that renaissance. So that gentleman you're seeing on screen is making this all happen.
Well, thank you, Dick, but it's a massive team effort.
So one question here, and with regard to, just to clarify, what you're suggesting or saying, the work that you're doing is around curing mental health issues as opposed to chronic medication to suppress symptoms. Are we understanding that correct? The potential for curing as opposed to chronic medication to suppress symptoms. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would say though that there are some people that will relapse. Life is continually challenging, and so we may be working with somebody who's been debilitated with PTSD. We can help them get over it. We don't see that much in the way of relapses, but some people will. So I just don't want to create the wrong impression that cure means people never get it again. But our whole approach is really intensive psychotherapy. Sorry for my dog barking in the background, but it's that sense of deep work to try to address the core symptoms and the core problems, rather than sort of just addressing symptoms.
Great. So we're coming toward the top of the hour, and first I want to tremendously thank Rick both for joining us and sharing his time today, as well as for the incredible work he is doing in the world. But before you leave, and I also want to apologize for some of the technical issues which we're working on. And will be addressed before the Tuesday, April 7th, Robin Carhart Harris, who I had mentioned earlier, will be the next global conference call. Before leaving, though, I want to make sure that people are thinking about how they can potentially be learning more. Just to give a sense, right now, major universities and hospitals around the country and around the world are getting involved in looking at the potential for psychedelics. So if you're in California and interested in UCSF, UCLA, and others, if you're in Boston and interested in what Mass General Hospital is doing, where I'm director, if you are New York, it could be Columbia, NYU, Mount Sinai, and even areas that are not bi-coastal, or generally you have in University of Madison, Wisconsin, as well as University of South Carolina. So basically all over the place, and Imperial College we'd spoken about earlier, work is being done in the Middle East. So I would encourage people to learn more. Utilize this group as a way of helping be a portal for what you may be interested in. And one other thing, think about, and please send a note back to the extent you're involved with something where you'd like others to know about it, you might want others engaged somehow or another for input or just sharing. And in the next call, we'll be looking to add that. So again, Rick, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and for your patience on a couple of technical. This has been fantastic. We'll be signing off now with gratitude. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dick, too, for organizing this.